Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jen and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. The other day, we did our Western Conference preview, talked about who we think are going to be the last team standing in the West, who are going to be the bottom teams. And today, we're going to do it for the Eastern Conference, home of my beloved Boston Celtics. And they are the defending Eastern Conference champions, though there is a large cloud looming over their head this offseason with the year-long suspension of head coach Ime Udoka. So a lot of uncertainty there. But the Eastern Conference is loaded, Sap. It looks to me like it's the best it's been in a long time, and it's been getting better and better. But it is super, super deep this year. And I think that means we're going to have a really competitive race to get to the finals in the East.
Jed, I never remember a conference being this deep. And we talked about in an earlier podcast what teams are going to tank to get the first pick in the draft to secure Big Vic. That's what I call him, Big Vic.
It's good. It's a good nickname.
Well, he's 7'3", 7'4", but he's got skills of a point guard, right? So, but we'll call him Big Vic. Or,
I call him taller Kevin Durant.
Which is scary, isn't it? I mean, because it seems like he has a similar skill set, except he's 4 inches taller. Ooh, my God, good luck stopping him. But there'll be teams tanking out west. There'll be teams tanking in the east to try to get that first pick and get what looks to be the best player to come out since LeBron James, right? Because you can go through the first pick overall between 2003 and now, and a lot of great players in there, Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving and all of those guys, but not quite with the fanfare that we're going to see with Big Vic this year. I mean, he looks like a once-in-a-generation player. So you get teams like the Magic, the Pacers, the Wizards. Those are the three that come to mind that are at the bottom of the Eastern Conference. There's a couple other teams in there that I don't think they're in full tank mode. They may want to try to get into the postseason. The Knicks, the Pistons, and the Hornets. Those are the other three teams that could go either way. The Pistons are interesting to me because they got the first pick last year in 2021. Cade Cunningham in 2021. He looks like he's going to be a sensational player. I like Jaden Ivey, who was their first pick this year. So you've got two real pillars there. If they ever were able to get the number 1 overall pick and get Big Vic, they could be on their way to being a dominant team. And then you've got 9 other teams, though, Jet, that are in playoff contention. Look at the Atlanta Hawks, who made it to the Eastern Conference Finals just 2 years ago. I have them as the 9th best team in the Eastern Conference, and that's because they added DeJounte Murray to a pretty talented roster. I mean, the Hawks are a contender, and I have them as the 9th best team in the Eastern Conference. Obviously, they could move up if DeJounte Murray fits in perfectly with them, but that shows you how deep the East is.
Yeah, it's crazy loaded, and you and I think, if you're any sort of basketball fan, you probably look at the East the same way that you and I are looking at it. Bottom 3 teams in some order is the Wizards, Magic, and Pacers. Then there's that next tier, as you mentioned, Hornets, Pistons, and Knicks, and then from there, you got, a bunch of teams that, legitimately look at their rosters and say, hey, we think we have a chance. Now, are some of those teams deluding themselves? Probably. But I think you can look at SAP. If I'm looking at the Bucks, Celtics, Sixers, Heat, Cavs, Nets, Hawks, I think all those teams believe with pretty good reason they can make it to the Eastern Conference Finals. Like you said, the Hawks of those teams, the least likely, but they did make it to the Eastern Conference Finals just 2 years ago. So, and they got better in the offseason. And then the rest of them, the Bucks have won a championship the other year. Celtics were 2 games away from winning it in the finals. We know the Heat were in the finals in the bubble. The Nets, we know what they're about, kind of. The Cavaliers made the splashiest move in the offseason, adding Donovan Mitchell. And so, these teams are all really, really good and really, really competitive. Oh, I didn't even mention the 76ers, James Harden, Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey. That's a great big 3 right there. You got a coach who's won a championship in Doc Rivers. They added some nice pieces in the offseason. They added PJ Tucker. So this is a loaded conference, Sap.
Yeah, that's why seeding is going to be important. Like, here are the Celtics, the defending Eastern Conference champion, considered perhaps the favorites to win the title. At least they were until the Ime Udoka situation. I don't know if changing coaches makes you the third or fourth choice after being the favorite all offseason. But just work with me here. Here are the Celtics, who most people expect to make another title run. But if they're the fourth or fifth seed, they could be playing the Cleveland Cavaliers or the Nets or the 76ers in the first round, and they could get eliminated. I mean, it's that deep, the Eastern Conference. Just even look at what they accomplished last year. Yes, they swept the Nets, but those 4 games were decided by 18 points. And we're talking about a Nets team that Durant didn't seem to be that into it. Kyrie Irving, after the first game, seemed to check out, and they didn't have Ben Simmons. And it still was it sounds like a Yogi Berra statement. It was a close 4-game series. Like, if that makes any sense, because the games were close, but the series wasn't. The Cavaliers are loaded. The 76ers, it appears that James Harden's in shape for the first time in a long time. And when you had a player like PJ Tucker, I think you are now taken seriously. Not that he's a great player, but he's a great role player. It just seems like wherever that guy goes, they win.
Yeah,
won a championship with the Bucks.
And you have a guy who can, in any given series be the best player in the court, in Joel Embiid.
Absolutely. I still think the most dominant big man. You can debate who's better at the center position. Is it he or Nikola Jokic? I think the fun part of that debate is they're totally different players, but they're both great. Yeah. So just look at the East, and we didn't even mention the Raptors. The Raptors are, I think, the best run organization in basketball. And we didn't even mention the Bulls, who at one point last year were fighting for the top record in the Eastern Conference. And let's not forget, injuries wiped them out, right? Lonzo Ball missed the second half of the season. Alex Caruso is another one of those great role players, was out a big part of the second half of the season.
Levine
you put those guys.
Time. Yep.
Levine missed time. I think DeRozan kind of wore down because he was carrying the team. I mean, if that team stays healthy, they'll be in contention. I honestly do not remember any conference, East or West, being this deep going into the season.
Yeah, absolutely, Sap. Yeah, I mean, I think I didn't mention the Raptors or the Bulls. I think they're both very good teams, but I don't think that they have, can legitimately make the conference finals, barring, some big pickup or injury or something like that. But I do think Bucks, Celtics, Cavs, Heat, Sixers, Nets, Hawks all can say we have a really good chance of making the conference finals. And then once you're in the conference finals, you got a puncher's chance of making the finals. So, I mean, incredibly deep conference. And those teams, those fringe teams you mentioned, Sap, Pistons, Hornets, Knicks, all not bad teams by any stretch. The Pistons played the Celtics better than any team in the NBA last year, with the exception of the Warriors. And Cade Cunningham really, really came into his own in the second half of the season last year. They had a nice draft. They have a nice young core there. I think that they're building something strong in Detroit. The Knicks made, the big signing this offseason to bring in Jalen Brunson. They held on to RJ Barrett as opposed to, trading him to try to get Donovan Mitchell. We talked about that this offseason, but the Knicks think that, the Barrett Brunson backcourt is something that can lead them to prominence. They have Julius Randle too. So, those are 3 very good players right there on a team that we look at as a, fringe Eastern Conference team. And the Hornets have, maybe the best young player in the league in LaMelo Ball. Somebody that, I think we're both very high on, though he just got hurt. It shouldn't really impact much of his season, maybe just the start of it. Terry Rozier, we know what happened in the offseason with Bridges and the domestic assault. So he's not going to be part of that organization, might not be part of the NBA anymore in his career, because it was the details are that gruesome of that. But certainly not a bad roster by any stretch. So, and then Sap at the bottom of the East, like we said, the Wizards still have Bradley Beal, a guy who averaged 30 points a game a couple of years ago. The Magic are building something with Franz Wagner and Jalen Suggs. And they bring back Jonathan Isaac this year. They have Markelle Fultz, certainly Wendell Carter, Mo Bamba, a lot of good young pieces on that team. And then the Pacers have 2 guys that the Lakers want, Miles Turner and Buddy Hield. But they will, and a guy that I love, Tyrese Halliburton. So I don't look at any team in the East and say, yeah, this team is total crap. They don't have one player worth watching.
Didn't the Pacers blow out the Celtics last year in the middle of a long Celtics winning streak?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
It does happen. I mean, this is the NBA. There's games where it's back-to-back. You're traveling. You're just not really into it, and the other team's sitting at home for 3 days, and they've got so much more energy. But you just look at the top 6 teams in the Eastern Conference, at least the way I have them laid out in the power rankings. Bucks, Celtics, 76ers, Cavaliers, Nets, and Heat. Okay, so if we assume that those 6 teams will avoid the play-in tournament, your play-in tournament could be Raptors, Bulls, Hawks, and Hornets. That's awesome, really. I mean, you could be looking at, the Raptors, who, again, I think is the best run organization in basketball. I think Scotty Barnes is on the precipice of being a superstar. We know what the Bulls did last year. They're a deep, talented team. The Hawks, adding DeJounte Murray, the Hornets, you detailed their roster. Those could be the 4 teams in the Eastern Conference play-in, all above 500, battling for the 2 playoff spots and, the right to play, say, the Celtics and Bucks in the first round. So the East is just so deep because for a decade, Jet, and again, it only took me about 11 minutes to mention him, LeBron James dominated this conference. He went to 8 straight finals. I mean, it was his conference. Now it's anyone's conference.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about the Western Conference, the past 2 shows, Sap, and more at length the other day. And if you look at the bottom of the West, with like the Kings, the Thunder, the Rockets, the Spurs, and the Jazz, like those teams are all crap. Like they're just very devoid of talent that's, in their prime or about to be in their prime. They either have guys who are really promising young guys, but they have not even scratched the surface yet, or they are a complete tear down like the Utah Jazz or the San Antonio Spurs. I don't see any team in the East that on a given night you're like, yeah, that team sucks. This is a gimme. No, we'll show up. It's a no problem game. Because like I said, Sep, even the team that I think we both look at as the bottom in the Pacers have good players. Maybe not for long because they might, they're going to try to bottom out as much as possible, I assume. But they have good players. And the Magic have good players. The Wizards have good players. The Hornets have Pistons, Knicks, good players. So you're not going to see on a given night and say, oh, yeah, don't even bother. This team has no chance at all. And I know in the NBA, it's a long season. And like you said, it happens sometimes. But I think 1 through 15, as crazy as that sounds, there's not a team that's just like a complete horror show in my mind.
Until the Pacers trade Buddy Hield and Miles Turner.
Yeah, until that, Lakers, maybe. But then there's still Tyrese Halliburton, who I like.
Oh, no, he's a very good player, but I mean, I don't think he's going to carry them past
the 14th
or 15th. You do like your point guards that are feisty. I love that about you. You love those guys. And look, you did mention the Wizards, and I don't want to spend too much time on the bottom 4 teams in the East because there's so many great teams in the East. But the Wizards have Porzingis, who is quite capable of having he's the original Big Vic, right? Because when he came into the league and you saw him play, you're like, this is a 7'3" Kevin Durant. And again, the injuries, sapped him of his career pretty much. But yeah, no, the East is just loaded. I look, the first round of the Eastern Conference playoffs, if we put whoever in there, the Raptors, Bulls, or Hawks fighting for those last 2 spots, they're all going to be tough. You could see a 7 knockout or 2 very easily. We thought that was going to happen last year with the Nets possibly upsetting the Celtics. It didn't happen, but the East is just so deep in its quality depth. So the playoffs in the East, right top to bottom, is going to be fascinating to watch April and May.
Yeah, obviously the Nets, Sap, that you mentioned, are the biggest wild card in the East. That big 3 is obviously, in terms of names, incredibly imposing. Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, Ben Simmons. And you go, wow, that is quite a lot of talent. But then we saw what happened in the postseason. We see what happened in the offseason with Kevin Durant's trade request. Kyrie Irving doesn't seem like he really wants to be there, though. He opted in, because he was going to otherwise cost himself like $30 million. Talked about how much money he lost, and still talking about Alex Jones, retweeting him. He's an insane person, Kyrie Irving. And then Ben Simmons, who hasn't played basketball for, God, how long has it been now, Sap, since Ben Simmons has played basketball?
Since June or July, June of 2021. So it's been nearly a year and a half. I mean, he played in the postseason of 21 and missed all of last season. So yeah, it's creeping up on a year and a half.
Yeah. So a long time without playing competitive basketball. It doesn't seem healthy mentally or physically 100%. They're talking about him they want him to be aggressive and stuff like that. All I've seen in practice footage of Ben Simmons is him clanking a lot of shots. But in terms of Sap, years ago, when we were starting this podcast and talking about Ben Simmons back when he was a 76er, I think we were saying, and you were the first person that talked about him going to the Nets. I don't.
Mhm.
I think at the time you were talking about a Kyrie Irving for him swap
Right.
instead of a James Harden for him swap. But the principle was that the best fit for Ben Simmons is a team that has two primary scorers, and he doesn't have to be the second scorer on a team. Okay, Brooklyn Nets, perfect. You got arguably the best scorer in the league, and Kevin Durant. You have one of the best scoring point guards in the history of the game in Kyrie Irving. Perfect role for Ben Simmons, and yet
Yep.
the questions remain.
Without question. I mean, you look at the big three in Golden State, right? Steph, Clay, and Draymond. I'll take the big three in Brooklyn of Durant, Kyrie, and Ben Simmons. In terms of pure talent, Brooklyn's big three is better. It is. I don't even think it's arguable. I think they're better. I mean, we're talking about two guys who were the first overall pick in the draft, and Simmons and Kyrie Irving. Kevin Durant, who was the second pick overall in the 2007 draft, who I think is the most accomplished, most varied scorer I've ever seen. I don't even know how to put it into words anymore, but I think he has more ways of scoring than anyone I've ever seen play basketball. I'm not saying he's the greatest scorer, but he's got the biggest toolbox on ways to put the ball in the basket, even more than Michael Jordan, Kobe, LeBron, Wilt, Kareem, all those great players. He could score in more ways than they could. I don't even think it's close in terms of pure talent, right? But again, the Warriors just fit better together because they have the leadership of Steph Curry. They know the pecking order. They understand their roles, and they just go out and do it. And again, they have a good coach in Steve Kerr and a great support system. Brooklyn, it's kind of like you took three great musicians, but the sound isn't really that great. You would think it would be great, but it just doesn't work. It's not in harmony. Look, Ben Simmons is more gifted than Draymond Green, right? I mean, I think we can all agree on that. I mean, he's 5 inches taller. He's a better athlete. He's better, but he's not a better player. I think, I was in a debate with someone on Twitter that, I just stopped debating with them. I think Kyrie Irving's more skilled than Steph Curry. I didn't say he's a better player. He's more skilled. And come on, Kevin Durant's better than Klay Thompson. So if they ever clicked, right, that team would be impossible to beat. If they ever clicked, that's a big if. They could lose in the first round again, and it wouldn't surprise me. Or they could show up in the finals, and it wouldn't surprise me. The variance, the floor, the ceiling of the Brooklyn Nets is that varied.
Sure. I mean, I think that they're the hardest team to predict in terms of not just what they finish in the regular season, but what they do in the postseason. It's not a team that you'd want to put money on because it's just such a wildly volatile situation. You said in our last podcast, Sap, that you could see Kevin Durant getting traded this season.
Sure.
Kyrie Irving could get traded this season. Ben Simmons, I don't know. I don't think that they feel like if they start off slow, they have to keep this roster. Or I don't know what the vibes are with the team. It doesn't seem great. But if you even look at the rest of the roster, I like what they did this offseason. They added Royce O'Neal who's a nice 3-and-D player from the Jazz. TJ Warren, we saw what he could do in the bubble as he filled it up as a scorer when he was on the Pacers. He hasn't played in a while, though. He's been hurt, but they got him for virtually nothing. Markieff Morris, a nice player, good enforcer to have on a team. They still have Patty Mills. They have Cam Thomas, who was their rookie last year, who's a really good scorer. Nick Claxton, we saw that he's a very capable rim protector in the postseason. And then they add Joe Harris back, who was injured for most of last year, who is a great 3-point shooter. So it's not just the three guys. Their roster is really good, but the three guys are all such head cases that despite a good roster, despite all that talent, they could still completely implode.
Before we get to our conference picks, get to the final four of the Eastern Conference and decide who we think is going to represent the East in the finals. If Phil Jackson was 12 years younger, or if there was another coach like Phil Jackson, who I don't think is the greatest coach in the history of the sport, but he's the greatest coach when coaching great players. If he was available 12 years younger or someone like him and stepped in, then I think it could work. That's the type of coach you need.
Not Steve
But there's
Nash.
No one like that. Not Steve Nash. No, not Steve Nash. And quite frankly, there's no coach in the league that is got the cachet to do that. Not Doc Rivers, not Steve Kerr, who, again, we talked about in the last podcast, is talking about this big crisis in Golden State. He's never really faced a crisis. Dealing with Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and Ben Simmons is dealing with a crisis, but there was no one better at dealing with that than Phil Jackson. He was a master at that, but again, he's 78 years old, and he's not going to coach anytime soon. Although he probably looks at that roster and go, that would be interesting to come back and coach, because he'd be the one guy that could make it happen. But that's not going to happen because of his age. If there was another coach like him that could handle those personalities, they would be lethal. But again, like I said, they could be in the finals. They could get bounced in the first round. Heck, last year they had to go in through the play-in tournament to make the playoffs. That's, a surprise considering all the talent they have. Although when Durant got hurt in January, they were the number one seed in the East. So that's their ceiling. That's how good they can be.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, there's certainly going to be an interesting team. I'm obviously going to be rooting very, very much against them because I hate Kyrie Irving with the passion of 1,000 suns. So I really hope that they completely bottom out. But yes, Sap. So we've talked about a lot of these teams over the offseason. So I guess that leads us to who we think is going to be representing the East as the final four teams.
Yep. And, the interesting thing about this, Jed, is if you could probably poll 10 people and you wouldn't get the same combination. You get the same teams because there's 7 or 8 teams that I think are better than the rest of the Eastern Conference, but the combination would be different no matter who you speak to. So I'll go first if you don't mind.
Please.
I have the Cavaliers, Bucks, 76ers, and Celtics being the final four after I just pumped up the Brooklyn Nets for 7 minutes and talked about how great they are, how great they can be. I have them losing in the first round of the playoffs, but I just think that those teams are better constructed and somewhat more focused at that point. So when we get to the semis, I actually have the Cavs upsetting the Bucks because I think Jared Allen and Evan Mobley are both sensational defenders, and I think that they could at least contain Giannis. And I actually have the 76ers beating the Celtics. I think the Celtics are going to be in for a tough year. It's not nice. I'm sorry. I mean, we're going back to the early 80s here.
The Lakers winning the finals and LeBron winning every award. And yet
it's going to be the 76ers and Lakers in the finals like it's the early 80s all over again. I'm, waiting for Kurt Rambis and Mark Ivoroni to square off at power forward. But I just think the Celtics, again, without Rob Williams until January, I think that's a factor. Al Horford, now 36 years old, is going to be asked to play more. They stayed away from injuries for the most part last year. The coaching change. I still think they're going to be a contender. Look, if they showed up in the finals, I wouldn't be shocked. But I think the 76ers, provided they stay healthy, and that's, again, a big if with Embiid and Harden, I think that they can outlast the Celtics. And then in the end, I have the Cavaliers beating the 76ers in the Eastern Conference Finals. I'm all in on Cleveland.
Wow. You're a big Donovan Mitchell guy, Sap.
Not necessarily a Donovan Mitchell guy. I just like that they added him to 3 other All-Stars. Right? I mean,
they're crazy talented.
Evan Mobley didn't make the All-Star team last year. He's going to make All-Star teams. Jared Allen is made the All-Star team, and Darius Garland did. And if they can, tidy up the bench, which you can do, right? If this team gets off to a really good start, you can have some veterans saying, hey, I may want to go to Cleveland. I'm kind of hoping LeBron goes there. I think he'd have a better chance to win a title in Cleveland than in LA, but that's not going to happen. But I'm all in on the move they made, and I think that they're going to be for real this year. So I got the Cavaliers beating the 76ers, making it to the finals.
Wow. It would be fun to see the Cavaliers play the Lakers in the finals. I don't think either team is going to get there, but that would be a fun finals, right?
Yeah, I mean, I got the Nuggets going there. So the Nuggets Cavaliers NBA Finals, I'm sure ABC would be pumped up for that.
The league will be thrilled about that. That's exactly what the matchup they want to see. I have for my final four the Bucks, Celtics, the 76ers. And since you said the Cavs, I'm going to take a swerve and I'm going to say the Hawks. I really, really like DeJounte Murray. Yep. I really, really like Trae Young, obviously. I'm a big Capella fan. I'm a big John Collins fan. I think they make sense as like a modern NBA team who can rim run and shoot threes. So I like what they're doing in Atlanta. I think that was a good move. And I think Nate McMillan's a really, really good coach. So I'll say them as my fourth team. I have the Bucks heading to the finals, Sap. I think that in my mind, the gap has widened between Giannis being the best player in the league and then who's the second best player. I think it was really close, but I think right now, after what he did in the postseason, I know the Bucks didn't win, but without their second best player, Middleton, took the Celtics to 7 games, and Giannis was phenomenal. And obviously, when they won the title the year before, was historically phenomenal. So I think with having the best player in the league, that puts them in a huge advantage. I think they have a chip on their shoulder based off of what happened last year with the injuries and the fact that they're still, people are still talking about all these teams in the East that made moves, and the Celtics and the Sixers and the Cavs making these big moves. Everybody's talking about the Nets. So I think that probably pisses them off. And I think that, with Middleton, if they could stay healthy, with Middleton healthy, they're just a super well-constructed team. And I'm always going to be deferential to the team that I think has the best player in the league. And I think that Giannis is not by a huge margin like LeBron was for a long period of time, but by a decent size, Giannis is the best player in the league right now.
I agree with you, because of all the players that are in contention for that title, whether it be Steph, or Kevin Durant, or LeBron, they're the three older guys that are still discussed as being the best player in the world, or whether it's Luka Doncic, Joel Embiid, Nikola Jokic. Those are the three younger guys that are discussed.
Right.
He's by far the best defensive player. And I know you love defense even more than I do, but a tiebreaker for me is defense. That's why Michael Jordan was the best player clearly for 10, 12 years. And look, I loved Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, but once you saw Michael Jordan 3 or 4 years into his career, you looked at him and said, that guy's different because he's an elite defender. That's why I think LeBron's been the best player over the last 15 years for the most part because of defense. I mean, they do play half the court.
I'm a huge Jordan guy. I'm going to tell you this. Maybe this is sacrilegious to some people. Giannis is a better defender than Jordan.
He's bigger. Yeah, he's bigger. He is. He's bigger. I mean, the block he made in the finals 2 years ago,
only player in the league that could make that play. He's the only player in the league that could do it.
Maybe one of two players in the history of the sport that could have made that play, and the other guy, Bill Russell. So that's hallowed ground. As great as Kareem was, or Shaq, or all these other great players, they weren't as athletic or nimble as Giannis or Bill Russell was. Bill Russell was a track star.
Right.
Those are the only two guys.
Star, yeah.
Yeah, those are the only two guys. LeBron probably could make that play.
Early in his career, not now.
Early in his career, but he's also bigger than those guys. Again, the thing about LeBron, everybody's always said he's never really developed this mid-range game. That kind of that drive to the basket and pull up from 12 to 15 feet, which Jordan and Kobe were incredible at. It's impossible for him to do that. He's too big. He's
too much momentum. Yeah,
right.
Physics doesn't work out on that one.
Karl Malone couldn't do it, and LeBron's maybe even bigger than Karl Malone. It's just the physics aren't there. But back to Giannis. No, he's the best player. You can make a case he's a superior defender to Michael Jordan. Jordan could cover points. He could cover off guards. He could cover pretty much any wings. He was ferocious.
So can Giannis.
And Giannis happens to be 6'11". So he's phenomenal.
Sap, I don't like, and this is, we're not going to get super deep into this because we'll talk about it as the season progresses. It does seem like so many players, especially ex-players, keep moving the goalposts for Giannis or for what the greatest player in the NBA should be. I don't know what more somebody expects the best player currently in the league to be than what Giannis is putting out on the court night in and night out. What more do you want him to do? How is it not? To me, it's obvious that he's the best player in the league. I don't think you need to have a sustained argument. No. I've watched basketball for 30 years. You've watched it for longer than that, Sap. I'm just looking at the eye test and seeing what he does night in and night out. To me, it's obvious he's the best player in the league. So I don't see where the argument is, and yet people continue to argue it. I just don't personally get it.
There's a pushback. He's a foreign-born player, which we've never called a foreign-born player the best player in the world. Maybe with the possible exception of Hakeem when Jordan was out of the sport for a little period of time. It's always been an American player, and it's always been, Bird, Magic, Michael. Then you go from there, whether it was Shaq and Kobe or Duncan, and then LeBron for a long period of time. There's that pushback. He didn't come through the AAU system. He does feel like an outsider because he plays his ass off every game. And I think some of the cool kids in the NBA look and say, slow down, you're making us look bad, because we don't play with that maximum effort every night that you do. So they kind of push back on him. So you've got Milwaukee winning the East, playing Golden State in the finals?
Yeah.
Okay. And how do you get that turning out?
I'm Milwaukee beating them.
Okay.
I think that Milwaukee would be a little bit more poised than what the Celtics were last year because they rally around Giannis. Yeah. And I think he's shown now at this point in his career, when the lights are the brightest, he can perform the best, which is not what Jason Tatum did, unfortunately, last in the finals. And it's exactly what Giannis did in the finals, 2 years ago in their elimination game in Game 6. He had arguably the best game of his career, one of the greatest games in the history of NBA Finals. And,
17 of 19 from the free throw line, which is his Achilles heel. So, you got Milwaukee over Golden State. Look, if that's the finals, I'll be pulling hard for Milwaukee. I could not stomach Steph Curry winning a 5th title, and then the same people coming at me again telling me that he's the player of his generation, not LeBron.
Right.
I have the wild finals of the Nuggets over the Cavaliers, just maybe for comic relief, but again, that would be interesting. So want to give out our year-end awards? I'm sure these are going to be interesting to listen to.
Well, I think, we'll start with the lesser awards, because I think you have an idea of who I have as MVP.
I would say so. Yeah, I think you gave that one away.
I gave that one away, but I'll start with my rookie of the year. And I think it's the obvious choice. It was the top overall pick, Paolo Banchero, your Paisan. He's going to be playing for the Orlando Magic this year. He looked fantastic in limited action in the summer league. He is such like a perfect modern NBA player. Big, strong, can stretch the floor. His biggest competition for the award, Chet Holmgren, is already out for the year. So I think he might win this in a runaway, Sap.
I'm going to go with Jaden Ivey of Detroit. I'm very high on him. I'm high on them. I think he's a ready-made player, an athletic guard who can shoot. So I think he'll be able to work his way into the league, maybe better than some of the athletic guards that weren't really accomplished outside shooters. So I'll go with Jaden Ivey of the Detroit Pistons as rookie of the year.
I really like the player too. And this sounds, like sacrilege from a Celtics fan. And I sneaky love the Pistons. Like I'm going to be rooting for them. Like they might be my second favorite team in the league this year. Well, I really like that team.
That I want to see Big Vic go there. Because first of all, Detroit's a great sports city. It really is.
And they're going to be too good. I think they're going to be too good.
But if they somehow win the lottery, in miraculous fashion, which can happen, I'd love to see him in Detroit with Kate Cunningham and Jaden Ivey. Talk about a young, talented big three. But I like the Pistons as well.
So you have Ivy as your rookie of the year. I got Banchero, coach of the year, Sap. I think you'll like this one because as a team you're very high on. I take JB Bickerstaff from the Cavs. I think that with the addition of Donovan Mitchell, they should be able to. I would be shocked if they exceed expectations in the regular season and end up with one of the top 2 or 3 seeds in the East.
Yeah, I think so too. Donovan Mitchell is going to want to prove that he's an elite player, and they've already got a bevy of all-stars. I have the same pick. I just couldn't come up with anybody else. Maybe Mike Malone in Denver because I'm high on the Nuggets, but they're kind of expected to be a contending team. No one expects Cleveland, although if you look at the roster, you would put them high in the Eastern Conference. I'm the same as you, JB Bickerstaff as coach of the year.
And I think he was trending in that direction too for a long time last year before they had injuries to their front court and to Mobley and Allen. And their season sort of went down the drain towards the end of the year, and they were, eliminated early on in the process. But I think that he's got a good chance to win it this year. 6th man of the year, I have the award coming home to Boston, Sap, for my guy Malcolm Brogden. I think what I've seen of him in summer league play is exactly what people look for in 6th man of the year. He's going to come off the bench and score points, get assists, and play good defense.
I can't
on
really
a team that's
disagree
be
with
really
that.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, a guy that might score 20 a game, right? Because, also the fact that he's going to get even more minutes at times if you want to scale back a little bit with Tatum and Brown. And I think you'd leave him in that 6th man role and he goes out and scores 20 points per game like Tyler Hero did last year with 6th man of the year. I can't really disagree with that one. It's not good radio that we're agreeing, but I think the next few awards we're going to disagree, and I think it's going to be hotly contested.
Okay, most improved player of the year, Sap. I've already tipped my hand on this one too. Tyrese Halliburton. That's my guy on the Indiana Pacers. I don't think the team is going to be particularly good, though I don't think that they're like as bad as some of the god-awful teams out west. But once he got to the Pacers, after he was traded midseason for Domantas Sabonis, he started playing really, really good basketball. And I am expecting the Pacers to make some trades this year, try to bottom out, and that just means that he's going to be the only guy capable of scoring the basketball. Last year, he averaged 15 points, 4 rebounds, and 8.2 assists per game. I think this year he's going to score 20 or more points a game. Rebounds and assists will probably be about the same. If you add up your scoring average by over 5 points a game, I think that puts you right in the running for most improved player.
I'm going to go with Scotty Barnes, second-year player from Toronto. Love this player. Reminds me so much of another Scotty that's an all-time great, Scottie Pippen. I saw him on media day. He's a monster. I mean, he obviously worked his ass off in the offseason. He looks like he's ready to go. He can do so many things. He struggled from outside the three-point arc last year, but I think he's going to improve because he's a pretty good free throw shooter. I generally think if a guy is a good free throw shooter, that will translate to becoming a decent three-point shooter. Tends to work like that. If he adds that to his game, look out. And that's such a well-coached team with Nick Nurse. Great organization. I got Scotty Barnes, most improved player.
Yeah, I think that honestly, last year set sort of a weird precedent for it with John Morant winning it, and that Scotty Barnes is obviously the reigning rookie of the year and established really good player already. And so I think that the precedent of last year indicates that the NBA doesn't care if you're already a really good established player.
Right.
They'll still can give you that award. So Scotty Barnes completely, I think, has a great chance to win that award this year. Defensive player of the year, Sap, I have Draymond Green, barring he doesn't get suspended at some point this season.
He's going to punch out the opponents, and that's the way he's going to slow them down. That's always a good choice.
I think he would have won it last year had he not been hurt for a long portion of the year.
Yeah, and you saw their record without Draymond Green, right? I mean, they won like 32% of their games without Draymond. Their defensive numbers were average without Draymond, superior with him. I mean, he's an impact player. We both like him as a player. I like him on the podcast. I like all of that stuff. I just don't need him punching out his teammates. Defensive player of the year, I think I'm like rewinding the calendar or the clock here. I'm going with Ben Simmons. I think if healthy and focused, this guy could be right there with Giannis as the best defensive player in the league because of his sheer size. I mean, we're talking another guy that's 6'11", 250 pounds who can cover everyone.
He's a phenomenal defensive player. If he plays 20 games, he's not winning defensive player of the year.
No, that's unless he's, really, really good in those 20 games, right? He shut down everybody. But I'll go with Ben Simmons as defensive player of the year. Because if he plays 65 games, which is about average for the top players in this league, actually it's pretty good for the top players in this league, then I think he can win the award.
All right, Sap, we got about 2 minutes left. So with our final 2 minutes, we got our MVP choices. I don't have to say more about mine. Mine is going to be Giannis. I was just talking about him for the last 10 minutes. That's my pick. I don't have to say anything more.
All right, I'm going into the Wayback Machine myself. Anthony Davis, MVP. He looked spectacular this year. I'm going to say 27-12, and the Lakers are a third or fourth seed in the Western Conference. He plays 70 games, and they are a contender as much for LeBron James, but even more so for Anthony Davis, who's totally focused this year. He's too talented not to have another great season or two in his career. I got Anthony Davis as league MVP, which I believe is like 25 or 30-1 right now. So I could make a lot of money if I wager on that.
I'd say that the odds of somebody on a team with LeBron James winning the MVP over LeBron James are low.
That's a good point. Imagine if Anthony Davis won the MVP, Skip Bayless's head would explode.
Oh my God, that would be what a
Jordan
day for Skip
never
Bayless.
Played with an MVP
what a
candidate.
Day for Skip Bayless that would be. He's crossing his fingers. Believe me, nobody wants it more than Skip. He'd be happier than Anthony Davis would be. All right. Well, that's our Eastern Conference preview, as well as our predictions for the awards. We're really excited for the season to start, obviously. If you can't tell, stick with us all through the regular season and then postseason and finals and everything, as we will have you covered for everything basketball and NBA related, as we keep an eye on the good teams, the bad teams, the middle teams, everything that you could possibly want. Make sure you check out our social medias for updates on the show at JohnSapp25, at Jet Stryer. Again, we are the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sapp, presented by Full Press Coverage. Go check them out, and we'll talk to you later, everybody. See ya.